Okay, so here's my confession. I cheated on my fiancé with his best friend, who just so happens to be a well-known politician, and then I exposed him. I didn't expose them both. I only exposed the politician because I was scared to tell my fiancé. Like, what do you even say to someone when that happens? So this is how it went down. I met John at work. He was this super charismatic politician doing some sort of speaking engagement at our company. And then we ran into each other at the bar after, and we started talking, and he was just really charming and handsome and successful, and I felt like we had a really deep connection. Now, mind you, I was engaged to Mike, my fiancé at the time. We were getting married in 3 months. We had already bought the house. We had already started planning the honeymoon, and I loved Mike. I really did. But at the same time, I was also going through a bit of a quarter-life crisis. I was like, why am I settling for this guy when I can have someone like John? So I broke up with Mike 2 weeks before my birthday. I told him that I wasn't feeling it anymore, and that I didn't want to get married. And then on my birthday, I go to this club with my girlfriends and I see John there. Turns out he was there with his best friend, Mike. They were celebrating Mike's birthday and I was furious. Like, why did he invite his best friend to celebrate his birthday at the same club that I was at? It was so awkward. So then my friends are like, let's go talk to them, and they're like, no, they're my friends. You can't just go over there and be like, hey, how's it going? No, you gotta make a grand entrance. So they come up with this plan. They distract John by saying, hey, come take a shot with us. Meanwhile, they walk over to Mike and they're like, hey, happy birthday. And then they're like, you know what would make your day even better? If you came over and danced with me. And Mike was like, hell yeah, let's do it. And then while they're dancing, I sneak over to John and I'm like, what the hell? Why did you invite Mike? This is supposed to be your birthday, you know? You could have just said you didn't want him there and I wouldn't have gone. And John was like, oh, I didn't think you were coming. And I was like, no shit, I'm not. So then I turned to leave and he grabbed my hand and he was like, stay. And then he kisses me and I kiss him back. So then my friends are like, let's get the hell out of here. And we left. The next morning I wake up and I feel terrible because I just cheated on my fiancé with his best friend, and now I have to call them both and break up with them. Well, I guess I didn't have to call Mike, but I did anyway, and I told them both that I wasn't feeling it anymore and that I wanted to break up. Then I blocked them both on everything. A month later, John texts me and he's like, hey, do you want to get dinner? And I'm like, no, actually I do. I haven't seen you in a while and I miss you. And then we start dating exclusively and everything seemed great. Like he treated me well. He was attentive. He took me to fancy restaurants and we slept together a lot. But something was always missing. Like I couldn't stop thinking about Mike. I couldn't stop wondering if he was okay. Was he sad? Was he drinking too much? Was he throwing himself into his work? Was he seeing someone else? Like I felt horrible for how I treated him. And then one night I got drunk and I called him. I didn't mean to, but I did, and it went straight to voicemail. So I left a message and I was like, hey, I just wanted to check in. I hope you're doing well. I know that I hurt you and I'm sorry for that. And then I hung up. And then a few minutes later I get a text from him and it says, I'm in a meeting right now, but I want to hear all about what you've been up to. So then I called him back and we started talking, and it turns out he hadn't moved on at all. In fact, he was still in love with me. He was still hoping that we would get back together. So I ended the call, and I blocked him again. 6 months later, I moved in with John. He proposed to me, and I accepted. And then about a year after that, we found out that I was pregnant. So, at this point, my whole world revolved around John. Like he was my husband, he was the father of my unborn child, and I loved him very much. But sometimes at night I would still think about Mike and wonder how he was doing. One night I got really drunk, and I told John all of my secrets. I told him about how I cheated on Mike with him, how I still thought about Mike sometimes, and how I felt guilty for hurting him. And then I passed out. And the next morning he wakes up, he looks at me and he tells me that he loves me, and that he'll never let anyone hurt me the way that Mike did. And then he gets up and he leaves, and I don't see him for the rest of the day. And then I get this text from an unknown number, and it says Mike isn't the bad guy in this story. And then I call the number, and it goes straight to voicemail. So I leave a confused message, and then I get a text back and it says, "I know things might seem confusing right now, but I'm here to help. Just trust me." And then I get a call and it's from Mike, and he tells me that he knows everything and that he wants to meet up. So I go to this cafe and I see Mike sitting there with his new girlfriend, and he tells me that he's happy for me and that I deserve to be happy. And then he looks me in the eyes, and he tells me that he hasn't stopped loving me since the day we met. And then he asks me if I still love him. And I tell him yes, I do love him. I've just been in love with other people before, but I think that this is different. This is real. This is the one. That's when I knew that I made the biggest mistake of my life. That's when I knew that I should have chosen Mike. Then I get this text from John and it says, "I need to talk to you about something important." So I leave Mike and I go home and I try calling John and he doesn't pick up. So then I get this text and it says, "Please meet me at the park across town. There's something that I need to show you." And then I get there and I see him and he's crying. And he's like, "I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." And then he tells me that he has HIV. And I'm like, "What? How? Like, how long have you had it?" And he tells me that he'd only just found out and that he was afraid to tell me. And then I was like, "Are you sure? Like, are you just saying that so that I won't tell Mike?" And then he looked at me and he was like, "No, I'm serious. I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." And I hugged him because I felt bad for him. But at the same time, I was also relieved because now I had a reason to stay with him. Like, I could stay with him out of pity. I could stay with him because I felt bad. Then the next day I get a call from Mike and he tells me that he hasn't heard from me in a while and that he's worried about me. And then I tell him that everything's fine. And then he tells me that he loves me and he wants to be with me. And then I tell him that I still love him too, but that I'm in a committed relationship. And then he asks me if he can come over and I say yes. And then he gets there and he sees John and he's like, "Oh, hey, I'll come back later." And then I was like, "No, he doesn't know that I'm seeing you." And then he was like, "What?" And then I told him everything. I told him about how I cheated on my fiancée with John, how I still had feelings for him, how I felt guilty about it, and then how John told me that he had HIV. And then he was quiet for a moment and he was like, "Well, that's a lot to take in." And then he asked me if I was sure that John had HIV, and I was like, "Yeah, he showed me the test results." And then he asked me if I was sure that I still loved him, and I said yes. And then he was like, "Well, then you should stay with him." And then he left. And then a month later I gave birth to John's baby girl and we named her Ava. And then 2 years after that, Mike texted me and he was like, "I'm getting married." And I was like, "What?" And then he was like, "Yeah, I'm marrying a guy named Joe and I couldn't be happier." And then I was like, "Oh, that's great." And then I didn't respond. So what did I learn from all of this? Well, firstly, maybe you shouldn't cheat on your fiancé with your friends. Yeah, it was hot, but it was also messy. Secondly, I guess I learned that it's okay to settle. Like, maybe Mike wasn't the most exciting person in the world, but he was a good guy and we had a great foundation. And maybe I just needed to focus on that more, rather than trying to find something new and exciting. Thirdly, I guess I learned that sometimes the grass isn't greener on the other side. Like, John was exciting at first, but then it got old. And honestly, I don't think that he ever really loved me. Like, he was only with me out of pity. I was only with him out of pity. And then fourthly, I learned that sometimes it's better to just move on rather than holding on to the past. So that's my story. Thanks for listening. See you next time.